The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched like a metal cave filled with the sounds of angry voices. 12 different species sat around the massive circular table, each group speaking in their own language, while small devices translated their words into sounds the others could understand. The air smelled of different chemicals and gases that each species needed to breathe. Jake Morrison sat at the human table and watched the chaos with tired eyes. His gray hair had grown longer during his 5 years as Earth's main representative, and deep lines marked his face from countless meetings just like this one. Next to him, Captain Lisa Wright tapped her fingers on the metal surface, her jaw tight with anger that she tried to hide. The Zephyrian delegate rose from his seat, his snake-like body coiling as he spoke through the translator box. His words came out flat and cold. The humans bring nothing to this council that we need. Their ships are slow and weak. Their technology is old compared to ours. Their worlds are small and poor. Why should they have the same vote as species, who built this council thousands of years ago? Several other delegates made sounds of agreement. The Torvan minister nodded his large head while his 4 eyes blinked in sequence. The Rillan representative's tentacles waved in what Jake had learned, meant strong support. Even the usually quiet Zelnari clicked their approval with their sharp claws. Jake had heard these same words so many times before. For 10 years, humanity had asked for equal voting rights in the council. For 10 years, they had been told they were too young, too primitive, too different. But they had also been asked to help when things went wrong. Human doctors had saved millions of alien lives during the plague on Kepler Station. Human engineers had fixed the broken defense systems around 3 different worlds. Human soldiers had died protecting colonies that belonged to the same species, now calling them worthless. Lisa leaned closer to Jake and whispered, "Sir, we have the data right here. Our medical advances alone have saved more lives in the last 5 years than any other species contributed in 50 years. Jake nodded but did not speak. He had tried using facts and numbers before. The council did not care about facts when it came to humans. They saw Earth's people as useful tools, nothing more. Councillor Thex of the Rillan Consortium spoke next, his voice bubbling through the water he breathed. Perhaps the humans could serve us better in an advisory role. They can give suggestions, but the real decisions should be left to those with wisdom and experience. The Cathani representative, Ambassador Zilsha, had not spoken during the entire meeting. Her people were known for thinking carefully before they talked, but Jake could see something in her large silver eyes that looked like sadness. Council leader Vexitar called for the vote that Jake knew was coming. All in favor of granting humans full voting rights in the Galactic Council. Silence filled the hall. Not one hand, tentacle, or claw rose in support. All opposed. 12 appendages rose into the air. Abstentions. Only Zilsha raised her thin arm. Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. Not surprise, because he had expected this result. Not anger, because he had learned to control that emotion years ago. What he felt was a kind of final understanding. The council had made their choice, and now he would make his. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that somehow cut through all the other noise in the hall. Lisa Wright stood with him, as did the 4 other humans, scattered around the massive chamber. Each human began gathering their papers, their data tablets, and their formal proposals that had taken months to prepare. "Where do you think you are going?" Councillor Thex demanded, his tentacles writhing with irritation. "This session is not finished. We have not dismissed you." Jake picked up the last of his documents and looked around the hall one final time. He saw species that humanity had helped, saved, and protected. He saw beings who had eaten at human tables, worked alongside human scientists, and called humans their friends in private while voting against them in public. "Actually," Jake said in a quiet voice that somehow reached every corner of the great hall, "it is finished. He walked toward the massive doors that led out of the council chamber. Behind him, Lisa Wright and the other humans followed without saying a word. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden silence that had fallen over the hall. "Come back here," Vextar shouted. "You cannot just leave. There are procedures. There are proper ways to end diplomatic relations." Jake paused at the doorway and turned, back to face the council one last time. "You are right," he said. "There are proper ways, but you forgot to use them when you had the chance." The humans walked out of the Galactic Council chambers and did not look back. Behind them, 12 species sat in stunned silence, not yet understanding that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Dr. Kevin Barnes stood at the window of New Geneva Station and watched the last transport ship disappear into the black space between stars. The massive station that had taken 15 years to build now felt empty and cold, even though the lights still worked and air still moved through the corridors. That was the final civilian transport from the Kepler colonies, Commander Nicole Price reported from behind him. Her voice echoed strangely in the observation deck that used to be filled with researchers from dozens of different species. All 47 million humans have been evacuated from the Outer Rim territories. Kevin nodded and made a mark on his electronic tablet. The list of empty human settlements grew longer each day. Ross 128b had been cleared 3 weeks ago, along with its population of 12 million. Proxima Centauri b had taken longer because of the mining operations, but even those complex facilities had been shut down and abandoned. The humans had taken their families, their personal belongings, and their knowledge, but they had left behind empty buildings and silent machines. "Any word from the Colonial Administration?" Kevin asked. "All department heads confirm complete withdrawal," Nicole replied. "Every human teacher, doctor, engineer, and administrator has submitted resignation letters and departed for human space. The aliens are asking questions, but Command says we should not answer them." Kevin looked down at his tablet screen, which showed a map of human settlements across the galaxy. 6 months ago, it had been covered with green dots representing thriving colonies and research stations. Now, those same dots were turning red one by one as each location reported successful evacuation. The speed of the withdrawal amazed even Kevin, who had helped plan it. No other species in galactic history had ever moved so many people so quickly without using military force or causing panic. The humans had simply packed up their lives and left, as quietly as they had arrived decades earlier. "Sir," Nicole said, her voice uncertain, "we are receiving a transmission from the Keithani ambassador. She wants permission to dock with the station." Kevin shook his head. "Tell her we are in transit preparation and cannot accept visitors." Through the window, Kevin could see several alien ships hanging in space near the station. They had been arriving for weeks, but the humans had refused all requests for meetings or explanations. The withdrawal was not a negotiation or a protest that could be discussed and resolved. It was a simple fact, like gravity or the speed of light. A soft chime indicated another message arriving on the communication system. Kevin glanced at the screen and saw it was from Captain Matt Rogers, who was overseeing the evacuation of the military training facilities on Vega Prime. "Last batch of instructors departed this morning," the message read. "Alien cadets are asking when classes will resume. Should I tell them?" Kevin typed back a single word: "No." The truth was that the classes would never resume. The humans had spent 20 years teaching alien soldiers how to use advanced weapons and tactics, sharing knowledge that had taken Earth's military centuries to develop. They had done it freely, believing that cooperation would lead to mutual respect and eventually to equal treatment. Instead, it had led to yesterday's vote in the council chambers. Nicole was reading reports from other evacuation sites. Dr. Susan Blake finished clearing out the medical research lab on Titan Station. She says the alien staff cannot operate the surgical equipment she modified. They are requesting technical manuals. "Tell them the manuals went with Dr. Blake," Kevin replied. This was happening everywhere humans had worked. The modifications and improvements they had made to alien technology were failing without human maintenance. The aliens had never bothered to learn how the improvements worked because they had assumed the humans would always be there to fix things when they broke. On Targon 7, the mining equipment that human engineers had redesigned was shutting down, piece by piece. The alien workers could not figure out how to restart the advanced systems that had increased production by 60%. On the medical station orbiting Arcturus, alien doctors were discovering that they could not replicate the new surgical techniques that Dr. Blake and her team had developed. Kevin remembered a conversation he had with Ambassador Jake Morrison just before the council vote. "They think we need them more than they need us," Jake had said. "Maybe it is time to show them how wrong they are." The plan had been simple in concept, but complex in execution. If the Galactic Council did not want humans as equals, then humans would leave entirely. Not just the diplomats and politicians, but everyone. Every human scientist, teacher, engineer, and worker in alien space would return to human territory. Every improvement humans had made to alien technology would be left behind without instructions or support. "Kevin," Nicole said, interrupting his thoughts. "I am getting reports from the Rim colonies that alien ships are trying to follow our transports." "Any hostile actions?" Kevin asked. "No, sir. They seem to be just watching. But some of them are asking our ships to stop and explain what is happening." Kevin smiled grimly. "Tell our people to maintain radio silence and continue to the rally points." The rally points were locations in deep space where human ships were, gathering before making the jump to territories beyond the current galactic borders. Humanity had been secretly preparing new worlds in unexplored regions, places where they could build a civilization without interference from species that saw them as inferior. As New Geneva Station began its final shutdown sequence, Kevin thought about all the alien friends he was leaving behind. There had been many good relationships between humans and other species, individual friendships built on mutual respect and shared work. But individual friendship was not enough when the governments and councils made decisions based on prejudice and fear. The station's main computer announced that all systems were ready for final departure. Kevin took one last look at the view outside, where alien ships still waited for answers that would never come. "Nicole, signal the escort fleet that we are ready to depart." "Yes, sir." As New Geneva Station moved away from its position, powered by engines that the aliens had never understood, Kevin felt both sadness and anticipation. They were leaving behind decades of work and friendship, but they were also heading toward something new and entirely human. The aliens would figure out soon enough what they had lost. But by then, humanity would be gone. Minister Haxley stared at the production report from Targon 7 and felt his stomach sink into his boots. The numbers made no sense at first glance, so he read them again more carefully. Mining output had dropped by 60% in just 3 weeks. Equipment failure rates had increased by 400%. Worker productivity had fallen to levels not seen since the colony was first established. "Explain this to me," he demanded of his aide, a nervous young Torvin who kept shifting, his weight from one foot to another. "Sir, it appears to be related to the departure of the human engineering staff," the aide replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Haxley's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. "The humans left 3 weeks ago. How can that affect our mining operations?" "Now!" The aide pulled out a data tablet and began reading from it. According to the facility reports, the human engineers had made extensive modifications to our extraction equipment over the past 5 years. They improved the efficiency and safety of the systems using techniques that our staff do not understand. When the modifications began failing, our engineers tried to repair them using standard procedures, but the equipment no longer responds to conventional commands. "So fix it properly," Haxley snapped. "We cannot, sir. The human improvements are too advanced for our technicians to understand. Chief Engineer Bob Patterson apparently redesigned the entire gravity manipulation system using principles that are not taught in our technical schools. Without his knowledge, we cannot maintain the equipment he modified. Huxley felt a cold feeling spreading through his chest. Bob Patterson had been a quiet human who rarely spoke at official meetings, but had worked miracles with machinery that everyone else had given up on. Huxley had barely noticed when Patterson submitted his resignation and left with the other humans. Similar reports were arriving from across Torvin space. The agricultural stations that human scientists had helped design were producing smaller crops. The water purification systems that Dr. Susan Blake had improved were starting to show signs of contamination. Even the simple lighting systems in government buildings were flickering because human technicians had modified them in ways that no one else understood. On the other side of the galaxy, Zephyrian military commanders were discovering their own problems. Captain Matt Rogers and his tactical team had upgraded the planetary defense systems around 6 different worlds, but the upgrades were failing one by one. The shield generators that had protected Zephyrian colonies from asteroid impacts for years were now shutting down randomly. Admiral Kexalon called an emergency meeting of his senior staff to discuss the crisis. "How did one human team become so important to our defenses?" he asked. "Sir, Captain Rogers did not just maintain our existing systems," replied his chief of staff. "He completely redesigned them using human innovations that increased their effectiveness by 300%. Our technicians learned how to operate the new systems, but Rogers never taught them how to repair or modify them. The truth was becoming clear across the galaxy. Humans had not just worked alongside other species, they had quietly improved everything they touched. Their modifications and innovations had become so integrated into alien infrastructure that removing the humans was like removing the foundation stones from a building. Trade Coordinator Velness was the first to understand the full scope of the problem. She had access to economic data from all the major species, and what she saw terrified her. Human contributions to galactic productivity had been far greater than anyone realized. The humans represented less than 5% of our total population, she reported to an emergency session of the Economic Council. But their improvements to our technology, medicine, and agriculture were responsible for nearly 30% of our economic growth over the past decade. Councillor Thex dismissed her concerns with an annoyed wave of his tentacles. "Impossible. Human technology is primitive compared to ours. They are just maintenance workers and assistants." Velness pulled up a holographic display showing production statistics from 50 different worlds. 3 weeks ago, these were all functioning at peak efficiency. Today, they are all operating at 60% capacity or lower. The only common factor is the departure of human technical staff. The medical crisis was even worse. Dr. Rachel Turner had developed new surgical techniques that had revolutionized treatment for 7 different species. Her research into quantum biological synthesis had led to cures for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. But her methods were so advanced that no other doctor could replicate them. Hospital Administrator Zektar sent desperate messages to human space, begging Dr. Turner to return and train replacement staff. The messages were not answered. Human communication networks had gone completely silent, as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. "This is sabotage," Councillor Thex insisted during another emergency session. "The humans deliberately sabotaged our systems before they left. This is an act of war." But Ambassador Zilshaw of the Kethani had been studying the situation more carefully. "If this is sabotage, it is the strangest kind I have ever seen," she said. "The humans improved our systems and then left without providing maintenance instructions. That is not sabotage, that is simply the end of free technical support." The realization was starting to dawn on some of the more intelligent council members. The humans had not been primitive assistants or maintenance workers. They had been innovators and problem solvers who had quietly revolutionized galactic technology. They had shared their knowledge freely, asking nothing in return except equal treatment and respect. Instead, they had been dismissed as inferior and denied basic rights in the government they had helped to support. Now they were gone, and their knowledge had gone with them. The modifications and improvements they had made were failing because no one else understood how they worked. The aliens had been so convinced of their own superiority that they had never bothered to learn from the humans who were making their lives better. Wellness looked at the latest reports and felt sick. Food production was down across 12 systems. Medical facilities were closing because they could not maintain their equipment. 3 different species were facing economic collapse because their infrastructure depended on human innovations that no one else could maintain. "How long do we have?" she asked her staff. "At current rates of decline, major systems will start failing within 6 months," came the reply. Complete infrastructure collapse could occur within 2 years. The Galactic Council had spent decades dismissing humans as primitive and worthless. Now they were about to discover just how wrong they had been, but the humans were gone, and they were not coming back. The emergency klaxons screaming through the Rillan capital city could be heard for hundreds of kilometers. Citizens looked up at the sky with growing fear as the planetary defense grid flickered and failed like a dying light bulb. Chief Engineer Bob Patterson had spent 3 years perfecting the gravitational field generators that protected their world from asteroid impacts, but now those generators were shutting down one by one. Commander Vex Cole stood in the defense center and watched, helplessly as red warning lights covered every display screen. "How long before complete system failure?" he asked his technical team. 18 hours, maybe less, replied his chief technician, a Rillan whose tentacles were trembling with stress. "The human modifications are too complex for us to understand. We have tried everything, but the system will not respond to our commands." Through the massive windows, Vex Cole could see the first small asteroids beginning to burn up in the atmosphere as they slipped through gaps in the failing defense grid. Larger rocks would follow soon, and without the grid to deflect them, the capital city would be destroyed. "Send another message to human space," Vex Cole ordered. "Tell them we will pay any price for Bob Patterson to return and fix the system." The range communication officer shook his head sadly. "Sir, we have sent 47 messages to human territories in the past week. None have been answered. It appears that humans are no longer accepting any communications from council species. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The medical station orbiting Vega Prime had been forced to close its emergency surgery department because the advanced equipment that Dr. Susan Blake had designed would no longer function. Alien doctors were attempting to perform complex operations using outdated tools that had not been needed for years. Dr. Helmon, the station's chief medical officer, stared at a patient who was dying from a condition that would have been easily treatable just weeks earlier. "The humans developed a cure for this genetic disorder," he told his staff. "But their treatment requires equipment that we cannot operate and medicines that we cannot synthesize." The patient was a young Kethani female, barely past childhood by her species standards. Her parents had brought her to the station because human doctors had successfully treated similar cases in the past. But Dr. Blake and her team were gone, and their medical innovations had died with their departure. On the mining world of Kepler Station, the situation was becoming desperate. The atmospheric processors that human engineers had improved were beginning to fail, and the backup systems were not sufficient to maintain breathable air for the 3 million aliens who lived there. Plant manager Texavor had to make the terrible decision to begin evacuating the colony. "The humans improved our life support efficiency by 400%, he explained to the evacuation coordinators. "We thought our own engineers could maintain the improvements, but we were wrong. The human modifications are based on principles that we do not understand." The economic collapse was spreading like a disease. 12 major shipping companies had declared bankruptcy because their cargo systems had been optimized by human technicians, who were no longer available for maintenance. 4 agricultural worlds were facing famine because human scientists had developed crop rotation techniques that produced vastly improved yields, but required knowledge that had departed with the humans. Trade. Coordinator Wellness presented her final report to what remained of the Economic Council. 3 species had already withdrawn from the Council entirely, unable to maintain their infrastructure without human assistance. The total economic damage is beyond calculation, she reported to the half-empty chamber. Our initial estimates were completely wrong. Humans were not just contributors to our economy, they were the foundation that everything else was built on. Councillor Thex, who had been one of the most vocal opponents of human equality, now sat in silence as his own homeworld faced infrastructure collapse. The water purification systems that kept his people alive had been redesigned by Dr. Rachel Turner using techniques that no Rillan scientist could comprehend. "This cannot be happening," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They were just humans. Primitive, backward humans." Ambassador Zilsha of the Kethani stood to address the council, her silver eyes reflecting the emergency lighting that had replaced the normal illumination after the power grid improvements failed. Perhaps the question we should be asking is, not how the humans did what they did, but why we never bothered to learn from them. She activated a holographic display that showed the extent of human contributions to galactic civilization. For 20 years, humans worked alongside us, shared their knowledge freely, and improved our lives in ways both large and small. They asked for nothing except to be treated as equals, and we refused them even that basic respect. The display showed a timeline of human innovations, advanced medical treatments that had saved billions of lives, agricultural techniques that had ended hunger on 6 worlds, engineering solutions that had prevented 3 separate wars by making resource conflicts unnecessary, military tactics that had protected alien colonies from raiders and disasters. They were not primitive, Zilsha continued. We were blind. We saw their different technology and assumed it was inferior. We saw their smaller numbers and assumed they were unimportant. We saw their willingness to help others and assumed it was weakness. Council leader Vextar tried to maintain his authority, but his voice cracked with desperation. "We can fix this. We can develop our own solutions. We do not need the humans." "With respect, Leader Vextar, we have had 6 months to develop our own solutions," Zilsha replied. "Instead, our problems have only grown worse. The humans spent decades perfecting their innovations. Do we have decades to recreate what we threw away in a single vote?" Reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The Hyperion defense grid that protected the outer territories was failing section by section. The quantum communication network that connected distant worlds was developing increasing delays and errors. Even simple things like air recycling systems and food replicators were breaking down as human improvements degraded without proper maintenance. Captain Matt Rogers had left behind a single message that was now being broadcast on all frequencies. "Nothing was sabotaged. Everything was improved. The question you should be asking is why you cannot maintain what we built." The answer was becoming painfully clear. The aliens had been so convinced of their own superiority that they had never tried to understand human innovations. They had used the improvements gratefully, but had never learned the principles behind them. When the humans left, they took 20 years of accumulated knowledge and experience with them. Wellness looked around the council chamber, which was now less than half full as more species abandoned the failing galactic government. "We thought we were rejecting inferior partners," she said quietly. "Instead, we rejected our teachers." Outside, the galaxy continued its slow collapse into chaos, darkness, and isolation. The humans were gone, and they were not coming back. The personal laboratory of Dr. Alan Carter had been sealed since his departure 6 months earlier. But desperation had finally driven the Galactic Council to break their own laws about private property. Council investigators, hoping to find technical, manuals, or repair instructions instead, discovered something far more devastating: the complete personal logs of one of humanity's greatest scientific minds. Ambassador Zilsha stood in the empty laboratory and watched as the holographic display showed Dr. Carter's final recording. The human scientist appeared tired but calm, his gray beard neatly trimmed and his eyes filled with sadness rather than anger. The date stamp showed the recording was made just one day before humanity's complete withdrawal from galactic space. My name is Dr. Alan Carter, and this will be my final log entry from Titan Research Station, the recording began. I have served here for 15 years, working alongside brilliant minds from 12 different species. Today I received word that humanity has been denied equal representation in the Galactic Council for the 10th consecutive time. Carter's image paused and looked directly at the camera with an expression of profound disappointment. We came to the stars not as conquerors or traitors, but as students and teachers. We offered our innovations freely, improved alien worlds without asking for payment, and requested only to be treated as equals in the government we helped to support. The recording continued, and Zilsha felt her heart sink as Carter began, listing human contributions that had been overlooked or deliberately ignored by the Council. The faster-than-light communication improvements that had reduced transmission delays across the galaxy by 40%. The medical breakthroughs that had eliminated 7 different diseases and extended average lifespans for most species by 30 years. The agricultural innovations that had ended famines on 6 worlds and increased food production by 200%. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Walsh's military records tell a similar story, Carter said, calling up holographic displays that showed tactical innovations and intelligence-gathering efforts. Human strategies prevented 3 separate interspecies wars by making military conflicts unnecessary. Human intelligence operatives exposed corruption in the Trade Council that was costing member species trillions of credits per year. Human peacekeepers died protecting alien colonies from raiders, asking nothing in return except the hope that their sacrifice would lead to mutual respect. Zilsha had been present for many of these events, but she was only now beginning to understand the full scope of human involvement. The Council records had consistently credited alien leaders and commanders for successes that were actually achieved through human innovation and sacrifice. Carter's recording showed detailed files on dozens of projects where humans had solved problems that other species had considered impossible. The atmospheric processors on New Caprica that had made an uninhabitable world into a thriving colony. The gravitational wave generators that had prevented the collision of 2 gas giants in the Vega system. The quantum biological research that had saved the entire Zephyrian species from a genetic plague. We were not primitive, Carter's voice continued from the hologram. We were underestimated, and in your arrogance you failed to realize that our greatest strength was never our technology. It was our willingness to share it, to teach it, to improve your lives even as you diminished ours. The laboratory's main computer had been programmed to release these logs automatically if Dr. Carter did not return within 6 months. Now his words were being broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies, reaching every world where humans had once worked and lived. Other human logs were being discovered and released simultaneously. Dr. Susan Blake's medical records showed treatments she had developed that had saved over 40 million alien lives, all credited to other doctors in official reports. Engineer Bob Patterson's technical notes revealed infrastructure improvements that had prevented countless disasters, none of which appeared in his personnel file because he had never sought recognition for his work. Captain Matt Rogers had left behind tactical manuals that detailed how human military innovations had protected alien territories from threats the aliens had never even known existed. His teams had quietly prevented asteroid impacts, stopped plague outbreaks, and neutralized terrorist threats without ever requesting acknowledgement or reward. We leave not in anger, but in sadness, Dr. Carter's final words echoed through the empty laboratory. We had hoped to build something beautiful together, something that combined the best aspects of all our species. Instead, you have chosen to remain alone. The recording ended, but its impact was spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Alien leaders who had dismissed humans as inferior were now seeing detailed evidence of just how much they had depended on human innovation and sacrifice. Citizens who had barely noticed the quiet human workers in their communities were learning that those same humans had been the ones keeping their world safe, healthy, and prosperous. On the Torvan homeworld, Minister Haxley sat in his office and read through Bob Patterson's engineering notes with growing horror. The human had identified and quietly fixed 17 critical flaws in their planetary defense system, any one of which could have resulted in the complete destruction of their civilization. Patterson had never mentioned these repairs in his official reports because he had not wanted to embarrass the Torvan engineers who had missed the problems. In the Zephyrian medical centers, Dr. Blake's research notes revealed that she had developed cures for 3 genetic disorders that affected Zephyrian children, but she had allowed Zephyrian doctors to take credit for the discoveries to avoid creating political difficulties. The pattern was clear and devastating. For 20 years, humans had worked behind the scenes to solve problems, prevent disasters, and improve lives throughout galactic space. They had done this work quietly and humbly, sharing credit with others and asking nothing in return except the basic respect that comes with equal representation. Council leader Vexitar watched the recordings in his private chambers and felt something break inside his chest. The vote that had seemed so reasonable 6 months ago now appeared to be the greatest mistake in galactic history. The species he had dismissed as primitive had actually been holding galactic civilization together through their innovations and sacrifice. "Get me a communication link to human space," he ordered his aide. "Any frequency, any method. I will pay any price to speak with their leaders." The aide's response was quiet and ashamed. "Sir, we have been trying for weeks. The humans are not responding to any communications from Council species. Long-range sensors show massive construction projects in unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim, but no human ship has answered our calls. Reports were coming in from the frontier regions of space. Human vessels had been spotted near the edge of the galaxy, moving toward star systems that had been considered uninhabitable. Deep space monitoring stations detected signs of massive, terraforming projects and construction activities in areas that no other species had ever successfully colonized. Humanity was building something new, something beyond the reach of the species that had rejected them. They were not just leaving the Council, they were leaving the galaxy itself. Dr. Carter's words echoed in Zilshaw's mind as she stood in the empty laboratory. We had hoped to build something beautiful together. That hope was gone now, and with it, the future that might have been. 1 year had passed since the vote that changed everything, and Council Leader Vextar stood in the same chamber where humanity's fate had been sealed. The great hall that had once buzzed with the voices of 12 species now felt hollow and cold. Half the seats stood empty, their former occupants having withdrawn from the Council when their own infrastructure began to collapse without human support. The human delegation table remained exactly as Ambassador Jake Morrison had left it. No one had dared to remove the chair or the nameplate that still read Earth Representative. It stood like a monument to the Council's failure, a reminder of the words that had ended everything. Yes, it is. Vextar remembered those words clearly now, though he had not understood their meaning at the time. Morrison had not been agreeing that the session was over. He had been telling them that their entire civilization was finished. The Torvan Republic had declared bankruptcy 3 months ago when their mining operations completely shut down. The Zephyrian colonies were requesting emergency aid that no one could provide. The Rillan Consortium had lost 6 major worlds to infrastructure failures that their engineers could not fix. Even Vextar's own people were facing shortages of basic necessities as their production systems continued to degrade. Ambassador Zilsha entered the chamber and walked slowly to the empty human table. She placed a small recording device next to Jake Morrison's nameplate and activated it. Her own voice from 1 year ago filled the silent hall. "I abstain not because I question human worthiness, but because I question our own. I was the only one who voted correctly," she said to Vextar, her silver eyes reflecting the emergency lighting that had replaced the normal illumination months ago. "And even I did not have the courage to vote yes." Reports continued to arrive from the frontier regions, but now they painted a picture that filled the remaining council members with despair rather than hope. Long-range sensors had detected massive human construction projects in star systems beyond the galactic rim. Worlds that had been considered uninhabitable were being transformed through terraforming techniques that surpassed anything the Council species had ever achieved. Captain Steve Johnson's final message had been intercepted by Kethani listening posts just weeks ago. New colonies established beyond the rim. Terraforming proceeding ahead of schedule. Population growth stable. Advisory. Maintain quarantine protocols. No contact with former associates. The humans had not just left the Council. They had left the galaxy entirely, taking their knowledge and innovations to places where the Council could never follow them. They were building a new civilization in the void between galaxies, using technologies that the Council species could not understand or replicate. "They offered us partnership," Zilsha continued, her voice echoing in the mostly empty chamber. "They showed us wonders that we could have shared, and we threw it all away because we could not accept that the newest species might also be the most advanced." Vextar tried to maintain some dignity in his response, but his voice cracked with desperation. "We can rebuild. We can develop our own solutions. We survived for thousands of years before the humans arrived." "Did we?" Zilsha asked quietly. "Or did we just stagnate for thousands of years until the humans showed us what progress actually looked like?" The evidence was overwhelming now that the humans had been advancing galactic civilization at a rate that no other species had achieved in recorded history. Before their arrival, technological development had been slow and incremental. Most species had been content to maintain existing systems rather than innovating new ones. Humans had changed that. They had brought a culture of constant improvement and problem-solving that had revolutionized everything they touched. They had shared their innovations freely, taught their techniques to anyone who would learn, and asked nothing in return except basic respect and equal treatment. Instead, they had been dismissed as primitive newcomers who should be grateful for any consideration at all. The few remaining council members sat in silence as Zilsha activated another recording. This one showed the human evacuation in progress. Massive. Transport ships carrying millions of people toward the unknown regions beyond the galaxy. The ships moved with a coordination and efficiency that impressed even experienced military commanders. "Look at them," Zilsha said. "Even in departure, they demonstrate capabilities that we never recognized. How many other species could relocate? 47 million people across interstellar distances in just 6 months without losing a single ship or suffering any casualties." The answer was none. No other species in galactic history had ever attempted such a massive population movement, let alone succeeded at it so completely. Vextar walked to the great windows that looked out over the space around the Council station. Once, this area had been filled with ships from dozens of species conducting trade, research, and diplomatic missions. Now, only a few vessels remained, and most of those were carrying refugees fleeing from worlds that could no longer support life without human-maintained infrastructure. "What do we do now?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "We learn to live with the consequences of our choices," Zilsha replied. "We try to survive in a galaxy that we made smaller and poorer through our own arrogance." The final reports were devastating in their completeness. 17 worlds had been abandoned due to infrastructure collapse. Medical facilities across the galaxy were closing because they could not maintain the equipment that human doctors had improved. Food production had dropped to levels not seen in centuries. The faster-than-light communication network that connected distant worlds was developing increasing delays and failures. Most painful of all was the realization that humanity had offered solutions to problems the other species had not even known they had. Climate control systems that could have prevented the atmospheric crisis on New Caprica. Medical treatments that could have saved the Zephyrian children who were now dying from genetic disorders. Agricultural techniques that could have fed the refugee populations that were now facing starvation. All of it was gone now, existing only in the space beyond the galactic rim where humans were building something new and wonderful that the Council would never see. Zilsha stood and walked toward the chamber doors, following the same path that Jake Morrison had taken 1 year ago. "They tried to give us the future," she said without turning around. "And we gave them the door." Behind her, the empty human chair sat in silent judgment of the greatest mistake in galactic history. The Council had wanted humanity gone. They had gotten their wish, and now they would live with it forever.